are not mundane, and therefore Vidura was anxious to hear uh, the, the narration by Maitreya. Uh, so it doesn't mean that when the Lord's engaged in pastimes of war, that it's not equal to when the Lord is engaged in activities with the gopis. Everything is transcendental about the Lord. Okay, so by hearing these topics from the sage Narada, the son of King Uttanapada, Dhruva, was enlightened regarding the personality of Godhead, and he ascended to the abode of the Lord, placing his feet over the head of death. Well, that's the point. That while quitting his body, Maharaj Dhruva, the son of King Uttanapada, was attended by personalities like Sunanda and others who received him in the kingdom of God. He left this world at an early age as a young boy, although he had attained the throne of his father and had several children of his own. Because he was due to quit this world, death was waiting for him. He did not care for death, however, and even with his present body, he boarded a spiritual airplane and went directly to the planet of Vishnu because of his association with the great sage Narada, who had spoken to him the narration of the pastimes of the Lord. Well, let's go back to the previous purport, text 5, Canto 3, chapter 14, and where it says that foolish people are suspicious of Krishna's taking part in the battle of Kurukshetra, not knowing that his taking part ensured liberation for all who were present on the battlefield. It is said by Bismarck that all who were present on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original spiritual existences after death. Therefore, hearing the war topics of the Lord is as good as any other devotional service. That's the point. That's something that we should be very careful to understand. It's not that, oh, I only want to hear about Krishna's pastimes with the gopis. No, anything about Krishna, whether it's his pastimes in the battle of Kurukshetra, or his pastimes with the gopis, is transcendental. Why? Because Krishna is not subject to the three modes of material nature. Everything he does has spiritual potency, and we should hear it to learn all the different, let's say, nuances of spiritual life. Okay, so, and it says here, by hearing these topics from the sage Narada, the son of King Uttanapada, Dhruva, was enlightened regarding the personality of Godhead, and he ascended to the abode of the Lord, placing his feet over the head of death. So, not only Maitreya is explaining this to Vidura, but it was spoken previously by Narada to Dhruva. And what happens when you hear transcendental narratives about the pastimes of the Lord? Gradually you become liberated from the cycle of birth and death. So in the purport to Canto 3, chapter 14, text 6, it says, while quitting his body, Maharaj Dhruva, the son of Uttanapada, was attended by personalities like Srimad and others who received him in the kingdom of God. He left this world at an early age as a young boy, although he had attained the throne of his father and had several children of his own. Because he was due to quit this world, death was waiting for him. He did not care for death, however, and even with his present body, he boarded a spiritual airplane and went directly to the planet of Vishnu because of his association with the great sage Narada, who had spoken to him the narration of the pastimes of the Lord. So this is validation that when you hear the pastimes of the Lord, which are all transcendental, you become free from gradually from the cycle of birth and death, because your mind becomes transported to transcendental activities of the Lord rather than the activities of mundane people in this world. So every day, people listen to the news and they hear about all the nonsense things that mundane people do in this world. That doesn't help anyone to go back to God. But when you hear about the transcendental activities of devotees, genuine devotees, even though it might be about fighting or war or whatever, it's transcendental, it's purifying. That's something that is not understood by some people. So therefore they say, I only want to read about about Krishna and the gopis. I don't want to hear about anything else. So instead of hearing the 9 chapters of Krishna's activities with Bhagavad Kshetra and this and that, they want to go right away to the 10th chapter and hear about Krishna's pastimes with the gopis. And what the reason they do that is because they're attached to sense gratification. In other words, their understanding of reading Krishna's activities with the gopis is because of their desire for sense gratification, not desire to be purified. And so you can see how when you are in the association of genuine devotees, you go slowly, verse by verse, in the first 9 cantos of the Bhagavadam before you come to the 10th canto. You don't jump right away to the 10th canto, because that means you consider Krishna's activities with the gopis as something mundane, like a boy-girl type of, or man-woman type of activities, and you're reading it for sense gratification rather than understanding the transcendental nature of it. This is a very interesting point, because even though one may be, let's say, educated, they know how to read, write, all those things, and they have, let's say, a PhD, they still cannot understand the pastimes of Krishna correctly, because they don't accept, number one, to hear Krishna's pastimes spoken by a pure devotee. And when they read Krishna's pastimes, they speculate about it. They project their own, let's say, misconceptions in their mind onto Krishna's activities. Because don't forget, in this way, Krishna is acting like an ordinary person, but he's demonstrating transcendental activities. And this is where people get confused, because they say, well, he did this and he did that, and he's just, he's got 2 arms and 2 legs and a head. I got 2 arms, 2 legs, and the head. So I can probably, by doing a little more exercises and taking supplements and so forth, I can do the same things. No, it's not right. That's not correct. Krishna's body is not material, although it looks like he's an ordinary human being, especially in his Kumara stage, when he looks like a child. But he has all the potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's not an ordinary being. Therefore, we should not think that we can emulate, or in other words, act like the Lord. but we should be very interested to hear the activities of the Lord to purify our heart. But if we misunderstand, if we don't understand properly that the Lord is acting like an ordinary human being in certain circumstances, because otherwise, if you only hear about his Varaha incarnation, most people consider that like something which is in a narrative, just like you read about the uh, narratives of uh, people who are not actually existing. They're fantasy stories. So someone will consider the pastimes of the Lord as some fantasy stories meant to entertain you rather than transcendental scriptures meant to liberate you. So when we read something to be entertained, it's different than to read something to be spiritually, advanced. What's the difference? The difference is reading something for entertainment is sense gratification. But reading the activities of the Lord, not for entertainment, but for understanding the transcendental qualities of the Lord, is spiritual. So some people can read the same thing thinking that it is mundane, and other people who have faith in the Lord read pastimes knowing that these are transcendental activities of the Lord that have nothing to do with the mundane activities. So many times people are addicted to reading stories, like you read stories about war stories, or you read what you call narrations of poetic narrations of that have been made up by mundane people, like Alice in Wonderland or something like that, and that is not transcendental scripture. Transcendental scriptures, first of all, are spoken and by pure devotees about the actions of pure devotees and the actions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's not Alice in Wonderland. It's not war, mundane war descriptions. Is the transcendental activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here we see this history of the fight between the Lord as a boar, and the boar is like a big, gigantic, and the Lord boar is a gigantic incarnation of something that looks like a pig, but it's not an ordinary pig. The pig, they don't get bigger than something like this, right? But the boar is gigantic. It's reaches like almost almost to the highest points that a human being can see with their eyes. That means it could be, it's like hundreds of miles in length and height. And the demon Hiranyakashipu was heard by me a year long ago, as it was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by the other demigods. So the fight between the Lord as a boar, or like a gigantic pig, and the demon Hiranyaksha was heard for a whole year, as it was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by the other demigods. So not only is Lord Boar gigantic, it's not like an ordinary pig, he's gigantic, and beyond our ability to comprehend such a big thing, such a big, let's say, appearance. But the hearing about him is a year-long experience. And he was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by the other demigods. So if Lord Bor is so big, the description of activities is also gigantic and big and impelling, because it's so interesting that we can't take our attention away from it. We want to hear more and more about it. So now we begin to hear about Diti, one of the daughters of Daksha. So Daksha had many daughters, and the first one was Aditi, and the second one was Diti. So Diti, daughter of Daksha, being afflicted with sex desire, begged her husband, Kashyapa, the son of Marichi, to have intercourse with her in the evening in order to beget a child. The sun was setting, and the stage was sitting in trance after offering oblations to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, whose tongue is the sacrificial fire. Fire is considered to be the tongue of the Personality of Godhead Vishnu. And oblations of grains, I mean, oblation means something you offer into the fire of sacrifice. And oblations of grains and clarified butter offered to the fire are thus accepted by him. That is the principle of all sacrifices, of which Lord Vishnu is the master. In other words, the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu includes the satisfaction of all demigods and other living beings. Well, basically that last sentence is extremely important, because if you satisfy Lord Vishnu, all the other demigods are satisfied. But if you satisfy the demigods, Lord Vishnu may not be satisfied. So you don't have to worship the demigods. You give them respect, but you worship Krishna. And if you worship Krishna properly, all the demigods are satisfied. So this demigod worship is not really necessary. And but some people are so, let's say, overwhelmed by the demigods. Why? Because they want to get instant benedictions or instant sense gratification of their material desires, so they worship the demigods. But if you hear the pastimes of the Lord, you get purified. If you get instant gratification by hearing some things about the demigods, you don't get purified. Why? Because you're satisfying your desire for sense gratification rather than purifying your desires by hearing the pastimes of the Lord. So the whole purpose of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by genuine devotees is to be purified in the desire of sense gratification. But yet, there's stories in the Bhagavatam about, Aditi getting pregnant, and this and that, or fighting war, and different types of things that could be interpreted as being mundane, but they're not mundane. Why? Because they're connected to Krishna. Whereas mundane narratives don't mention Krishna. They mention ordinary people. So when you read, Alice in Wonderland, there's no mention of Krishna in Alice in Wonderland. And these are the type of books that are oftentimes recommended or mandated reading material for students. There's stories about mundane people performing mundane activities. So there's no spiritual purification by reading such things. If you read about Krishna's transcendental pastimes, you can gradually, especially if you're in association with genuine devotees, become purified of what? Of the desire for sense gratification. Therefore, devotees are murderers. They murder the desire for sense gratification by associating with them. And this is troublesome for some people because they don't want to stop gratifying their senses. And therefore, they try and avoid hearing about Krishna. But someone who is enthusiastic to hear about Krishna and his pastimes and is not adverse to being purified of the desire for sense gratification, those are the people that make spiritual advancement. Not everybody wants to be advanced spiritually. They want to be engaged in activities that are mundane, and they feel that spiritual things are boring for them because they want things that can inspire their sense gratification to get better. So they'll read all kinds of junk books that help them become a better sense gratifier rather than reading books that helps them purify the desire for sense gratification. Therefore, most of the books in libraries, and there's thousands of books in a library, are junk. They're not even worth using. Anyway, they're not in any way bona fide. But now we're hearing translation, the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, such as the history of the fight between the Lord as a boar and the demon Hiranyaksha. Well, we can understand demons, like usually demons are glorified in movies also. And it's almost the same here. We're hearing about Hiranyaksha, a demon. But in the activity of fighting with Lord Boar, who is an incarnation of Krishna, but the body that Lord Boar has is that of a transcendental pig, not an ordinary pig. Say, an ordinary pig is just so big, but Lord Boar is gigantic. He's as big as the sky in a sense. So and everything about hearing about Lord Boar is big. So here it says this history of the fight between the Lord as a boar and the demon Hiranyaksha was heard by me in a year long ago. In other words, the narration is taking a year. And it was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by the other demigod. So this discussion was originally what happened on the higher planets, were much higher than the Earth planet, and by demigods. Okay, so then text 8 says, Diti, daughter of Daksha, being afflicted with sex desire, begged her husband, Kashyapa, the son of Marichi, to have intercourse with her in the evening in order to beget a child. The sun was setting, next word, the sun was setting, and the sage was sitting in trance after offering oblations. Oblations means you're offering things into the fire of sacrifice, like rice or something. Ghee. After offering oblations to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, whose tongue is the sacrificial fire. So if you want to know why we have, ceremonies where we build a fire and then we offer things into the fire represents the mouth and tongue of Krishna or God. And we're offering things like ghee, rice, and so forth into the fire. And it's being consumed. in other words, eaten in a sense by the Lord. And at the same time, we say we have mantras glorifying the Lord while we're offering the oblations, means offerings. Okay, now, what's the purpose of performing those ceremonies, fire ceremonies? The fire represents the mouth of God. And it's to offer nice things to Krishna, or and you see the offering being eaten in a sense, but when it's getting burned, right? That's what happens when we eat. We have fire also in our stomach called hydrochloric acid. And we have some of it. When you don't live a good life, you eat all kinds of junk food, the ability to digest the food becomes, let's say, diseased, and you get sick. But when you eat properly, not eat too much, not eat too little, not eat all times of the day, but eat at specific times of the day. When you are munching or eating something all the time, you get sick because you're interfering with your body's ability to digest it. So therefore, there are specific times when we should eat, and at least 4 or 5 hour intervals, because it takes that much time for your body to digest the food. But if you keep eating and munching on things all the time, you destroy your digestive tract's ability to digest properly, and you have health problems, right? So it takes at least 4 to 5 hours for your body to digest something. So therefore, you have breakfast, you have lunch, and you have dinner. And there's always like 4 or 5 hours separation, or 4 or 5 or 6 hours separation between those meals. That way, you're giving your body the opportunity to digest the food. If you eat breakfast and then you get some other things to eat, like chocolate bars, this thing, it's that thing, and you're always eating and munching something, you're going to get sick, because you basically will destroy your body's ability to digest properly. The body takes at least 4 hours to digest something. And so we should eat only on specific intervals of 4 or 5 hours. That way you give your intestinal tract enough time to digest the food properly. And you usually will not get sick if you do that. Those persons who are regulated in eating and sleeping and all the functions of the body, they usually live a long time and don't really get sick hardly at all, because they're regulated, right? But the people eating all the time at different times, and sometimes standing up and talking on the phone and then eating something at the same time, they can easily get sick, because not only they're not regulated, but they're not focusing on what prasadam is. Prasadam is a sacred, what you would call commodity. It's been offered to the Lord, and now it's offered back. So therefore, you should sit down. Don't eat standing up or walking around. You sit down and you meditate on the fact that this has been offered to the Supreme Personality Godhead, so it's sanctified. Now you're not dealing with ordinary food, you're dealing with prasadam, and it should be taken with, let's say, reverence. Reverence means you're considering it to be the mercy of the Lord, prasad, and therefore you eat slowly and you meditate that this is the mercy of the Lord, and I am very fortunate to have prasadam. It's not just food. If we think of it as just food, and or as in a vulgar way, people say, "Well, it's time for some grub." Have you ever heard that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people, think food is just grub, it's something very mundane. No, we're eating prasadam, and therefore we should be reverent. We should be spiritually, let's say, respecting prasadam as the mercy of the Lord. Okay, so and then Canto 3, chapter 14, text number 9. The sun was setting, and the sage was sitting in trance after offering oblations. Oblations means offerings, uh, such as rice or other things, to the Supreme Personality of God, Vishnu, whose tongue is the sacrificial fire. Now we understand why we make a fire, uh, and we're chanting mantras, and we're offering things like rice and other things into the fire, which the fire is considered to be the tongue of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you're seeing your offering being consumed because the rice or whatever are eventually eaten, in the sense they're consumed in the fire. And the purport Prabhupada says, fire is considered to be the tongue of the personality of Godhead Vishnu, and oblations or offerings of grains and clarified butter offered to the fire are thus accepted by him. This is the principle of all sacrifices, of which Lord Vishnu is the master. In other words, the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu includes the satisfaction of all demigods and other living beings. So in life, we we have responsibility to please so many living beings. Like children have responsibility to please their parents. Parents have responsibility to please their children, and people who work in companies, they have responsibility to please their boss, and we have a responsibility to please the demigods, and we have responsibility to please Krishna, and we have this responsibility of pleasing so many different living entities in the world. And but if we please Krishna, all the living entities are pleased also. So we don't have to go one by one, pleasing every living entity in the material world. Simply by worshiping Krishna, you please all the living entities, because he's the father of everyone. So if you please the Father, you also please the Son, and so forth. Okay, so with simple things like grains and clarified butter, meaning ghee, offered to the fire, are thus accepted by him. That is the principle of all sacrifice, of which Lord Vishnu is the master. In other words, the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu includes the satisfaction of all demigods and other living beings. So if you perform a fire sacrifice, which is considered to be the tongue of the personality of Godhead Vishnu, and you offer grains and clarified butter or ghee, and you say mantras glorifying the Lord, then if you satisfy Krishna in that way, all the demigods and other living beings are satisfied. So you don't have to satisfy the demigods. The demigods are satisfied when you worship Krishna properly. And that type of, let's see, the other type of understanding is you have to worship the demigods, and you sort of consider that Krishna is an ordinary demigod. That doesn't please Krishna at all. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the supreme worshipable deity. And if you worship Krishna, then you don't have to worship the demigods. They will be satisfied by you worshiping Krishna. people worship demigods because they have material desires that they want satisfied. And they think that, well, if I go to the demigods, I'll get my material desires, which was true. But if I worship Krishna, he might not give me any what my material desires are. Yeah, Krishna will not give you anything that's not good for you. He'll give you uh, purification of those type of desires that want of sense gratification, and then you desire only to please the Supreme Lord. But the demigods will give you desires that please you, your sense gratification. And that only gets a person more entangled in the cycle of birth and death. So it's better not to go to the demigods, but to go directly to Krishna. And in that way, you can become purified of the desire for sense gratification, and you get eventually elevation to the spiritual world. So there's a big difference between demigod worship and worship of Krishna. That's what we should learn. We shouldn't be, let's say, attracted to the worship of demigods, like who are the demigods? You have Indra, you have Varuna, all these different demigods, and the smarter Brahmins or the Brahmins who perform all kinds of sacrifices. You probably don't understand so much of the Sanskrit, but you will understand when they say Indra and Varuna, this one and that one, and they are, addressing them in their mantras. But the only mantra that is actually, and only sacrifice that can actually be done properly in this Kali Yuga is chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So if you do a sacrifice and you only chant Hare Krishna, you're not making a mistake. If you try and chant all the other mantras that the priests chant, you'll make a mistake, because there's specific ways of how that has to be chanted. And there are no, let's say, bona fide, bona fide priest that can chant the mantras correctly today. If you read all the things that you have to be able to do as a bona fide priest, then you can realize that the priests today are not actually bona fide, which who chant the mantras. They don't say the words correctly. They don't follow strictly all the different things that you have to do to please the Lord. But if you simply chant Hare Krishna and offer your thoughts and activities to pleasing the Lord is satisfied. So therefore, even if you don't go to all these different pujas, but you simply chant Hare Krishna and engage in devotional service to the Lord is satisfied that way. If you engage in all kinds of these mundane sacrifices, it's not necessarily pleasing Krishna. So, and why? Because Krishna is pleased by pure devotional service. He's not pleased by mantras meant to improve your material life and sense gratification. So usually what happens is, in the beginning of a so-called sacrifice, if the person or priest says, say mama, and you repeat the word mama. Now what does mama mean? It means this is for me, right? Not for Krishna, it's for me. So those are the type of mundane sacrifices that are performed, and people like that. They want it to be for me, right? Not necessarily for Krishna. So this is going on now all over the world. People go to have sacrifices that benefit them, that benefit their material desires. And that's not the purpose of sacrifice. Sacrifice means you're giving up something and offering it to Krishna. So what are we giving up when we perform a sacrifice? We're giving up our desire for sense gratification, and therefore we're taking time to remember and worship, taking time to remember Krishna and worship Krishna and offer things that are pleasing to Krishna, such as chanting his glories with choice mantras and engaging in making offerings to the Lord. And then the Lord reciprocates by offering back the sanctified food or prashadam. So the real sacrifice is to chant Hare Krishna and eat only prashadam. Now, everything you're doing is an offering to the Lord, and the Lord is offering back his mercy in the form of prashadam and protection of the devotee. So that's what we should be interested in. We shouldn't be interested in getting something from the puja or the worship. We should be interested in pleasing the Lord by chanting. If you don't know all the mantras, that's okay. Just chant Hare Krishna. That's the main mantra anyway. It's called Maha Mantra, the great chant for liberation of living entity. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
You don't chant any other mantra, but you just chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Krishna is satisfied, and you will be very happy because you always have the holy names and on your tongue, and you're vibrating them and you're hearing them. And we should never chant silently, although you can chant silently, but it's much better to chant that's audible. At least you can hear it and someone near you can hear it. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare.
There are some people who just go, Not the proper way to chant. The proper way to chant is chant enough, at least that you can hear it and someone near you can hear it, you know. So there's this closed circuit, it goes from your mouth, goes out, and then back into your ear. So when it goes out, it's just like when you throw a rock into a pond or a lake, As soon as it hits the water, then there's circles form, and then the circle expands like that. So in the same way, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra should be done audibly, so that the sound vibrates, expands like that, like the circles of the lake. And as it expands, it goes all the way back to the spiritual world, because you're chanting something that is non-different than Supreme Personality of Godhead. You're chanting the names of God. Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare.
Expanding infinitely, going from here to the spiritual world, because it's a spiritual, let's say, vibration of the holy names of the Lord. So we should chant with utmost sincerity and seriousness, because we're dealing with something that's transcendental and something that can please the Lord if we do it nicely. So Krishna is in our heart, so he can tell whether we're doing it nicely or we're just, like that, trying to get it over, So we should be very, very serious about chanting Hare Krishna mantra nicely for the pleasure of the Lord. Okay. So text number 10. So chapter 3, canto 3, chapter 14, Text number 10. In that place, the beautiful Diti, so there's Aditi and there's Diti. The Aditi is, so here this is about Diti. The beautiful Diti expressed her desire. O learned one, Cupid is taking his arrows and distressing me forcibly, as a mad elephant troubles a banana tree. Purport by His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami. Beautiful Diti, seeing her husband absorbed in trance, began to speak loudly, not attempting to attract him by bodily expressions. She frankly said that her whole body was distressed by sex desire because of her husband's presence, just as a banana tree is troubled by a mad elephant. It was not natural for her to agitate her husband when he was in trance, but she could not control her strong sexual appetite. Her sex desire was like a mad elephant, and therefore it was the prime duty of her husband to give her all protection by fulfilling her desire. Now let's not misunderstand this purport, because her desire was to have a son, because the other, let's say, queens that, or the other women that were married to
Kashyap.
Kashyap and Muni, they all had sons, but she did not. Diti did not. So her desire to for her husband to help her have a son was not based on sense gratification. It was a legitimate thing. She wanted to have a son also, just like her the other brides or the other wives of Kashyap and Muni. And when it says that, her whole body was distressed by sex desire because of her husband's presence, it is not based on lust. It is based on a sincere desire to have a child, preferably a son, just like her co-wives. And so it was not natural for her to agitate her husband when he was in trance, but she could not control a strong sexual appetite. Her sex desire was like a mad elephant, and therefore it was the prime duty of her husband to give her all protection by fulfilling her desires. Okay, so it's not that they're using contraceptives to avoid having a child. It's that the real purpose was to have a bona fide child, and because at the moment of let's say husband and wife are trying to have a child, if they're meditating on Krishna, then they'll have a child. But today you have things like contraceptives, and then you have also pills that kill the child. So that is definitely not what's going on here. The sex desire was in order to have a child and to protect the child. But most people today, they engage in sex desire for their own pleasure, with no desire to have a child. And if they get a child, they get an abortion to kill it. That's like the worst thing you can do. If you want to ruin your life, you do something like that. And where you're actually killing your own child, either in the womb or even sometimes after they're born. It's very interesting. If you kill the child in the womb, you're not a murderer. If you kill the child when it comes out of the womb of the mother, you're considered a murderer. So there's a disconnect there. It's murder also if you kill the child in the womb of the mother. It's not that it's different than you kill a child when it comes out of the womb of the mother. But today, they make the differentiation between killing the child in the womb of the mother, and by the way, the child in the womb of the mother is not protected by the laws of the state. In other words, the child has to come out of the womb of the mother to be protected by the laws of the state. So these are what you would call, crazy laws that are speculated on. The child is a living entity in the womb of the mother, and therefore should be protected. But they do not, they, meaning the government, does not recognize the child as a living being that should be protected. The child has to come out of the womb in order to have, in order to, prosecute the mother who kills it of murder. But if you kill the child while the child is in the womb, they don't consider it's murder. They call it an abortion. And so these are what you call, false laws. Laws that in some way or other permit crimes, but you're not prosecuted for it by the government. But you're going to be prosecuted by Yamaraj if you kill the child in the womb. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I have two questions. My first question is how come Dhruva went through the personality of Godhead in his present material body, and most of the time, like when demons are killed by the Lord, they let go of the material body and then they go back to Godhead. So how is it possible for Dhruva to just, because from what I understood, it said that Dhruva stayed in his material body and he went back to Godhead.
Yeah, because material body was purified by the activities that it was performing in this world. So
technically, you could consider the material body spiritual, like a spiritual body.
yes, the material body has become spiritualized by full engagement in devotional service.
Okay, my other question was, I was getting confused there. I didn't write it down, but during the class you said something that is true, that Krishna is the Supreme Father and everything like that, right? But I have a question. If Krishna is the Supreme Father, and how, I don't know. Krishna is the Supreme Father. He created every living being, right? And so, is Radharani also created by Krishna?
Well, yes, everything is coming from Krishna. Nothing is independent of Krishna. That means the good people and the bad people, they're all from Krishna. But a bad person can become a good person by the mercy of Krishna. They engage in associating with devotees. So Radharani is an expansion. You can consider it an expansion of Krishna. Everything originally comes from Krishna.
So Radharani isn't really created by Krishna, is like expansion of Krishna?
There's a difference between creating and expansion. Expansion is part of Krishna that is manifested.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay, so there is even the Christians they have a conception of God, and then living entities are part, according to Christians, part of the body of God that expands to the body of God. They have that understanding also. So everything is coming originally from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of God. Nothing is independent. When a person becomes an atheist, they see things independent of Krishna or God. First of all, they reject the existence of God. So right away, how did everything happen if there is no God? And they say, well, it's nature. So what they do is they take a personality of Godhead out of the picture of creation, and they say it's part of nature. Now, everything looks like it's a part of nature, right? But behind nature is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's just like you see today a building, and you deny the fact that someone built that building. But if there's a building, there's someone that built it. Right? In the same way, if you're existing, or other people are existing, or the world is existing, nature is existing, it's not that it was there eternally. Somebody made it, and that's Krishna. Now, some scientists and some philosophers are very, let's say, clever. They'll say, well, it's been there eternally. It's always there. Nobody made it. But then there would not be any annihilation. There wouldn't be any death. If it was always there, it's always going to continue, right? But if you see in nature, things are born and they die. So, but there's always replaced by more things that are born and die. So that birth and death cycle proves that there's control. Something is controlling it, or someone is controlling it. Of course, Krishna is controlling it. You will not be able to see anything in the material world that is not subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. Everything is going to go through those four things. But those are material things. The soul is not subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. The soul is eternal. But it can take many different bodies, just like you have many different bodies in this lifetime. And then when you die, it's not that you're finished. Then you're going to get another body and start all over again. But it's possible to get a spiritual body and go back to the spiritual world. You're still having a body. You don't go back to the spiritual world as some kind of invisible spirit, or a ghost or whatever. And you're going back in a purified spiritual body to the spiritual world. And in this world, you can purify your material body by engaging in devotional service. So instead of eating hot dogs and hamburgers, you eat only prasadam. So now, the woman who ate only prasadam gives birth to a child. The child's body is made of prasadam. And then when the child grows up, all during its growing period, it's eating only prasadam. And as a adult, the person continues to eat prasadam and chant Hare Krishna. So they do not really have a material body anymore. They have a spiritual body because it's completely engaged in the service of the Lord. It may look material, but it's not. That's why when great saints die, they don't burn the body. They preserve it in salt and bury it, because the body of the saint is pure. It's engaged always in the service of the Lord. So some things are difficult to understand, but we need to engage in devotional service to purify all the false concepts that enter into the mind due to modern education. Modern education is actually dangerous because it claims things to be true that are not true. Like, for example, do you actually die? No, only the material body dies, not your eternal soul. Now, in mundane schools, the teacher would say, no, you die, and when you die, there's nothing. You're finished. So that's a false teaching. That's a false idea. The other false idea is you live only once. That's not true. There's such a thing as reincarnation. So we live in a country that is somewhat, Christian. The large, let's say, number of people in this country follow Christianity. Well, the Christians believe you only live once, and then when you die, you're judged, and if you're judged to be, let's say, because you committed too many sins, then you can die. You can stop existing, according to Christianity, or you go to a place where you're held in like in prison, and on the second coming of Christ, there's a final decision whether you should die and not exist anymore, or you can be purified and go back to Godhead. So these are, things that are made up. They're speculated. They're not actual facts. You can never really die. You have an eternal soul. But because you have an eternal soul, you could stay eternally in the material world and being born and dying and being born and dying. Now, this is something that the Christians deny. The Christians say you only live once, and you're going to be judged once. And if you're judged to be due to sins that you committed, and there's no way that you can be liberated then you die or you suffer forever in hell. So all that is false. Krishna is not a mean God. All right, so we'll start right there. We'll talk about this some more tomorrow.
So this seems to be one. Srijana Mataji, you want to go ahead and ask your question, maybe?
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna Maharaj. So while growing up, we learnt about Dhruva Nakshatra, Dhruva star. But in here, we see that Dhruva is going back to Vaikunta. So I was just curious, how are these nakshatras formed or stars? Like,
how are the stars formed?
right, because I haven't read, but I have heard that Dhruva became a star, and people often refer to Dhruva Nakshatra as the vibrant star in the sky. So how
did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious on like how are stars formed, or are the sages become stars, or like any.
Okay. Well, Dhruva lives on a planet called Dhruva Loka. So because he lives there and he's eternal, so that they identify the star with as Dhruva, because he's going to be there eternally. It doesn't mean that the actual star. It doesn't mean that Dhruva loses his identity as a living entity and becomes, a star. It means that he's going to be there eternally, and the star is the form of the star is purified by the presence of a liberated soul who's going to make that his place, or is the place where he engages in his devotional service to the Lord. So we should not think that the star, that the supreme, that the Dhruva becomes a star. We should understand that the fact that he's eternally liberated, he's going to be living on the star as his place of preaching and place of practicing spiritual activities. So it becomes spiritual or eternal. So what is your understanding? You have to see that the Dhruvaloka is an eternal star. It's never destroyed, even when the world is destroyed, because Dhruva Maharaj is there and is engaged all the time in devotional service. If you live somewhere, let's say you live in a place where there's only sinful people, then there's going to be birth, death, old age, and disease. But you live in a place where there's only devotional service going on and worshiping the Lord, you can eventually become immortal. Why? Because everything is used in the service of the Lord. So your body will not be immortal, but your soul will never, and your body will be purified and becomes a spiritual body. So how do you purify your body? It's not by using soap and water. It's by engaging it always in devotional service and activities that are pleasing to the Lord. So then your body becomes spiritualized, even though it's material. It becomes spiritualized by the fact that it's always engaged in devotional service. So when they bury, let's say, saintly people, they don't cremate their body, and they cover it in salt and so forth, because it's a spiritual body. It's not a mundane body anymore, because the person engaged their body and their mind, everything in service of the Lord. So you can transform your body into a spiritual body by keeping it always engaged in the service of the Lord. And something material becomes spiritual. Everything is actually spiritual because everything is coming from Krishna. But when you use things materially, then they lose that, let's say, that special aura of spirituality. Then they become mundane. But if you engage your body always and your mind always in service of Krishna, everything becomes spiritual. Your mind, your body, everything. So that is what is being taught in Krishna consciousness, to use your body completely in the service of God, of Krishna. Then it becomes a spiritual body. Therefore, such persons who are always engaging themselves in devotional service are given great respect, even worshipped, because they have no material desires. They're considered saintly persons. So a saint is given special attention. Even in Christianity, you have saints, right? And they're being prayed to, and they have the pictures of the saints and so forth, and they worshiping the saints as much as they're worshiping God or Krishna. We have the same thing. You have acharyas who, if people go to their where they're, let's say, buried samadhi, and they're worshiping and saying prayers and so forth. It's samadhi. So we should use our body only in the service of Krishna. Then it becomes, although it's made of matter, it becomes a spiritual body. Because you're not using it for sense gratification, you're using the body only to serve the Lord. So let's, you know, let's say there's a pencil, and you only use the pencil for writing down spiritual things, you know, prayers and so forth. Well, it's still a pencil, but it's engaged only in glorification of the Lord. So, although it's material, its activity or its use is spiritual. So it has a special quality at that point, you know, just like the Bible. The Christians, they'll before they read the Bible, they have it wrapped up in a nice cloth, right? And then they open the cloth, and then they read with reverence, and they treat the book with a lot of reverence. The Bible, it's not something you throw on the ground or, you know. The Muslims also, they're very careful about the Quran, the way they deal with that book. For them, it's a sacred thing, and it is sacred. Okay, so we'll stop there. And Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Pad ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Hare
Jai.